So we saw Benjamin Netanyahu a moment ago. He was speaking at the White House. He was there with Donald Trump as the US president signed a presidential proclamation saying the US recognizes Israeli sovereignty over the occupied Golan Heights. Israel seized the strategically important area in 1967 and has occupied it ever since.
The United States recognizes Israel's absolute right to defend itself. The despicable attack this morning demonstrates the significant security challenges that Israel faces every single day. And today I am taking historic action to promote Israel's ability to defend itself and really to have a very powerful, very strong national security, which they're entitled to have.
Kimberly Halkett is our White House correspondent. We know, Kimberly, that historically there have always been good relations between these two countries, but between these two leaders seems to have gone to another level, and Donald Trump taking the concrete steps that Prime Minister Netanyahu would want.
Yeah, this is a departure from 52 years of U.S. policy, so it's significant in that, in and of itself. There's no question that both of these leaders are facing tough times at home domestically, and so perhaps that may be part of the calculation and motivation, one that we know that the president here in the United States first indicated he would be making this presidential proclamation, recognizing Israel's annexation, essentially by Israel of Syrian territory. Now, this is going to be problematic for this president on a couple of levels, namely, given the fact that the U.S. very much strongly opposes Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, so there are going to be some questions asked about that. But there's also going to be some cynicism about this and the timing, given the fact that it's appearing very much like a sort of a cynical ploy to hand a foreign policy victory to the Israeli prime minister in advance of the Israeli elections. And also, even though there has been very much support here in the U.S. Congress, bipartisan support in a divided Congress for such a move, many people are also going to question here in the United States the timing, given the fact that Donald Trump is trying to deflect attention away from the Mueller probe. That, of course, that report has come out, and while it certainly did, in some respects, look favorable for the president, given there was found to be no collusion, it did not exonerate him as he had hoped. And so, as the U.S. Congress continues to explore those questions, many people are looking at this, even though there may be quite a bit of support for Israel here in the United States, questioning the timing of this presidential proclamation.
It's always in the timing, isn't it? Kimberly Halkett's our White House correspondent. Thank you. Now, in the past few moments, the United Nations has commented on Donald Trump's presidential proclamation over the occupied Golan Heights and, in fact, on the airstrikes in Gaza. James Bays, diplomatic editor at the UN. An update from you.
Yes, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary-General, put out a statement about the situation in Gaza, condemning the Hamas rocket, saying that he's just got the news of the ongoing air attacks and calling on all sides for restraint. That the message from the UN Secretary-General right now. I pushed his spokesman on the news about the Golan and the US recognition of Israeli sovereignty. There, the UN is saying it sticks to its existing position. Nothing has changed in terms of international law. But what they're not keen to do is criticize the United States and President Trump. They leave questions about whether the US was right to do this out of it and simply restate the existing position. I think behind the scenes, though, there are some of the US's closest allies who are certainly scratching their heads after this latest development following the recognition of the US of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. I think you're going to see some of this playing out in the coming hours in the UN Security Council, because it is meeting for a meeting that was already arranged on Israel and Palestine on Tuesday morning. You're going to see both the ongoing, if it's still going on at that point, Gaza attack and the recognition of the Golan coming up in that Security Council meeting. Also worth telling you that Nikolai Mladenov, who is the UN official who's based in Jerusalem, is here in New York. He's going to be having some urgent meetings with the UN Secretary General here. Thanks
to our diplomatic editor James Bays in New York. Let's start to tie it all together with Maoun Bishara, our senior political analyst here in Doha. A US proclamation, declaration, whatever you want to call it, tell me how much it counts for in the end, because, as James is alluding to there, there's plenty of other players involved here, and I've already seen the Russians saying that they say this is actually a violation of international law.
You know, every time I hear international law, and I hear myself saying international law, I feel like it's been a prayer. You know, one repeats a prayer every day, and one then just loses the meaning of it. So what do we mean by international law? This is not like ordering coffee at some fast food restaurant.
Well, it's what the United Nations...
No, what I'm saying is, in the end of the day, a signature on a proclamation and a tweet about a territory, handing it to some people who occupied it by force, has consequences. That means tomorrow, when something is going to happen to one of America's allies, I don't know, China moving on Taiwan, what's America going to say? International law. Otherwise, we're going to live in the law of the jungle. In the end of the day, the international law is just a word that we keep using. It's almost like a buzzword. But I think somehow we're not really digging in. In the end of the day, why will Syria ever now make peace with Israel? The whole point was, from 52 years ago, the international community, including the United States, especially the United States, reached Resolution 242 that said, you give up occupied territory, you get peace. The United States has been preaching that for 52 years. Why? Not because the United States and France and England and China and Russia, all of them that signed on it, are great and prophetic. Because there is consequences. You cannot recognize a country's annexation of a territory it acquired by force during wartime and then change the nature of that territory in contravention, again, I'm using international law, to the Fourth Geneva Convention. So actions have consequences, and I think President Trump is making such a mess in few moments, in few seconds, that I think future American presidents are going to take years, maybe decades, to clean up.
But what is it about President Trump that actually leads him to take action on these things? You and I were talking earlier and saying that this is, and Kimberly said it as well, this is a departure from 50 years of policy. Other presidents haven't done this. He does it. He moves the embassy to Jerusalem. He recognises Jerusalem as the capital. He moves on the occupied Golan Heights as well. Is this the deal maker in action?
Well, you know, one of America's closest presidents to Israel was Ronald Reagan. And Israel annexed the Golan Heights through a vote in parliament in the Knesset in 1981. The Reagan administration rejected the Israeli decision, and it, in fact, suspended for 2 years the special strategic relations with Israel, the so-called Memorandum of Understanding. Why does Trump do this? I think Trump is not exactly versed in foreign policy. He gets his advice from the four people that were standing behind him, 2 radical Zionists and 2 radical evangelical Zionists. Secretary Pompeo, Vice President Pence, and his son-in-law and his ambassador to Israel. That's who he listens to. And why then he acts on it? Well, one, now he is considered by a number of them, including his vice president, to be almost like a prophet. Secretary of State Pompeo called him like he's almost like a God's given gift to humanity for recognizing Jerusalem as Israel capital. The second thing is, this is just an easy, lazy way to enter the history books. So who was the first American president to do this and that? Well, it was President Trump. And then third, and I think that's where pragmatism and opportunism comes to play, I think both Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump benefit from this for their own constituencies. I think his hardcore support at home for the next elections is going to be energized by these decisions. And I think that says a lot about his base as much as it says about Netanyahu's base. And I think in the end of the day, as I said, Arab weakness, Palestinian disunity and weakness, and American support to Israel, Trump for Netanyahu, is allowing these things to happen. But the Middle East is not going to be like this forever. And I think in the end of the day, this will have consequences.
Okay, Marwan Bashar is our senior political analyst. Thank you.